Hey, folks. Hope your days are going well so far. Lavinia Mandentu is joining us here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself since it's your first time joining us here on Instructional Designers and Offices Drinking Coffee.
Hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I am Lavinia. I'm calling from Bucharest, Romania. I have a background in HR and L&D, and right now I'm running Offbeat, which is a space where L&D professionals come to share their experiences, share their knowledge, and also discuss their challenges and the future of L&D. So this is what I do all day.
You folks have been digging into, and you've been doing a lot of listening and a lot of learning, etc., about this world that we work in our learning and development spaces, whether we're instructional designers or content makers, all those sorts of different roles. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is because we're a space where there's a lot going on. There's a lot of change happening, a lot of new stuff, whether it's AI or other things poking their heads into our worlds and saying, hey, we're here. What are you going to do about it? So, I mean, let's talk about, I guess, some of the things that you've been hearing lately from folks.
Oh, so many things. Just like you said, there are some things that have been recurring over the years, ever since we started Offbeat, and also some new things. I guess AI is a big topic for everyone at the moment from multiple angles, I would say, because it is about how we are adopting AI as L&Ds. It's also about how we're supporting AI enablement in our companies, right? For everyone else to use AI in an effective, sustainable way. And it's also about the fact that AI is changing some learning habits that people have when it comes to, for example, consuming content, maybe even a bit about how they think about coaching and so on. So there are many angles when it comes to AI, and these are the new bits and pieces. But I would say the old topics still poke their head out here and there, like measurement in L&D, behavior change, how do we properly support it, the fact that we need to do more than training, we need to think more systemically. So all these things are not new, but are still very important regardless of the AI conversation.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of, I guess, reactions are you finding to AI? Let's just stick with that for a little bit here. I mean, I'm going to bet that it's probably not 100% the same for everyone.
You would win some money for that bet. It's a very wide range of reactions, and I say very wide because we have people who are extremely worried about the job market in general, about their roles, about sustainability, and so on. And then we have a bunch of people who are crazy about AI, who are experimenting every day in their roles, but even outside, I would say outside of the organizational boundaries, trying to figure out how to use AI. So yeah, we have everything in between as well. So quite a few diverse reactions.
Yeah. I know we've been talking from our team here at Domino, and I should probably mention, folks, the Instructional Designers and Offices Drinking Coffee, #idiotic, is brought to you here by the team at Domino, where we help L&D teams develop, scale, and deliver learning that maximizes employee value. We've had our client teams have been talking about it in different ways for more than a few years now, in different aspects of it. And some of the client teams are very, very cautious, right? A lot of very understandably so, because they work in and have secure things that they need to under wraps, etc. So there's a lot of concern about just the security of these types of tools, etc. Many of them have a very cautious approach. Then some of the organizations, though, too, are let's roll up our sleeves and get into it. It's really been interesting to see how even organizations in the same potential sort of vertical space or whatever have different kind of reactions to it. So, and then within those organizations, you might have people who are very cautious, but who mention that, yeah, I have been doing stuff myself, just to, so an embracing of it outside of the restrictions. Then not saying that they're breaking those restrictions, but I'm saying in their off time or whatever, they are making sure that they're on top of it, learning it, understanding it.
Yeah.
Maybe looking to be ready for it when it can come into their organization.
That's such a such an interesting point, because what I do hear across the board is how overwhelming staying on top of
Mm,
everything is, because there's so much noise. So the question is always like, how can I make sure that I do the maximum effort, but with the minimum energy that I have available? Because people have so many things on their plates
mhm.
at the moment. If they want to keep themselves up to date, how can they do so in the most effective way? And I would say that this is true for L&D, but it's true across the board for like product engineering, for everyone. So that's definitely a challenge that comes up at any stage of the range, let's say.
One of the things that I think about, and it's reflected, I think, in what I've read in some circles in other related or parallel spaces too, is if we have an amazing set of tools now with AI, do people even need to learn the next
Mm,
generation? Is there even a need for someone to learn something called instructional design anymore?
mhm.
So what are you hearing around that?
Oh, so many opinions. I think that the general agreement in the community is that yes, there is a need for a role that takes care of learning, maybe not the role that we've had so far. There are multiple things here that I can mention. First of all, just the fact that we have access to these tools and to content and even to personalized learning, that doesn't guarantee that people will also use the knowledge from AI, right? So the question is, how can we make sure that we look at things more systemically, that we look at the blockers that organizations have when it comes to learning? So basically asking what's blocking people in this organization to learn. And very soon, just by asking this question, we learned that it's not just access to content in general, AI in particular, and so on. There are so many other things like psychological safety, or the way the knowledge flows in the company, and so on and so forth. So I think one part of our role will be to look at those blockers. But then when we say, if we have all these AI tools, is this role still needed? We assume that human to human interaction will no longer be needed. So what we're already doing, right? When we bring people in training sessions, okay, traditionally we've been focusing quite a lot on content and less on connecting people in a training session. But I think that's where the beauty lies of an L&D role, facilitating those conversations and helping people make sense together of change or anything else that's on their plate. So I think our role in those cases and the traditional training will matter less, and helping people connect will matter even more. I think when content is abundant, when technology is abundant, I don't think the value of human interaction will be lower. I think it will be higher.
So we used to talk about, there are many topics which come up and they last for a brief period, and you see them at many conferences, and then something else new and shiny comes along.
Mhm.
And AI seems to be, more persistent than some of those in the past. But there was a phase where one of the topics that you'd see a lot at conferences, et cetera, it's being explored by different sessions, et cetera, was about the role of L&D, not just in making content, but the curatorial role of
Mm,
gathering things,
mm,
things together, et cetera.
mm,
It almost sounds to me like maybe what you're describing is that might start to become including curating people. In other words,
mhm,
connecting people as opposed to the content. Then is that
mhm.
kind of what you're hearing, or?
Yes, yes, exactly. We've been discussing so much what in our community, what does curation mean? Because I feel like it's been attached to content quite a lot. So we thought that curation is only related to content, but to your point, I think it can be about people. I think it can be about opportunities as well. So making sure that people see the projects they have available in their company, and connecting people to those projects, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it's just about content, but I still think curation is important. Curation of experiences. Yeah, it can be a broader term than it is at the moment.
Well, anything else that you're hearing, around the AI stuff that we haven't talked about yet?
I think what's interesting is that quite a few people, in L&D included, but broader, have been experimenting quite a lot with AI, but haven't had maybe the opportunity or the option just yet to integrate AI into their day-to-day work, right? Because it's one thing to just experiment randomly with AI. It's another thing to look at your processes, ask, okay, where does AI fit in? How much should an AI do in different steps of a particular process? When should the human intervene, and so on and so forth? So I think the discussion that we've been having just recently about this is, as L&D professionals, how do we make sure that we move from experimentation to process integration when it comes to AI? Because that's where the impact also lies. Otherwise, it's just spending money on AI, which we're recently learning that it's more costly than we initially believed, without actually seeing that ROI within our teams or in businesses overall.
One of the things that it's been mentioned in other episodes here, idiotic, that is that AI sure makes things faster to complete. You can use certain tools and generate more content more quickly. But it's also been reflected that isn't necessarily a helpful thing. And we've got a long history, regrettably, in our own space as well, of making lots of things that give people potentially information, but not knowing whether these are actually ultimately helping an organization with the changes that it might need, to increase profitability, to reduce risk. Are people actually taking something that we've given them, and actually, does it even get applied on the job, or is it just being consumed so that the check mark can go in the LMS and they get back on and do the same thing over and over again? And if you have a lot more stuff coming at people, being made faster and pushed out faster, etc., it feels maybe there's also a risk of even increasing that more, and actually ultimately maybe having less actual impact on the things that we're supposed to be doing, which are changing behaviors so that people improve things, etc. Are you hearing much around that front?
A lot. A lot, quite a lot. I think initially, just like you mentioned, one of the first use cases where AI has been used was content creation, and everybody was so happy that we can create content faster. And then very, very quickly, we went back and started asking, is that enough? Because there's an implied assumption there that if we create more content, people will change their behaviors faster, or more people will change their behaviors. But if we look back at the research, there are so many conditions that need to be in place for behaviors to actually change. Again, even traditionally, our training sessions, our e-learnings, whatever we did, were mostly solutions for a few of those conditions. Maybe for people to be aware that there is such a behavior and that that behavior can benefit them. Maybe for them to have some resources like, a framework. But then in the flow of work, to your point, people need reminders. They need incentives to change their behavior. They need so many other things. And again, it comes back, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about this as well. It comes back to that systemic thinking and looking at the behavioral blockers in the organization or in your team, in your department, whatever it is, and for L&D to act on those as well. And another conversation we've been having is that, okay, but AI can help us with automating maybe some of the processes that we've been doing so far manually. So it unlocks time for us to take care of these other things and come up with new solutions to the blockers that we see in the organization. And I think there's some truth to it. I think we were over optimistic with how quickly AI will help us deliver on that promise. But yes, I think there is a case to be made for expanding the L&D role beyond what we've been doing so far.
Mhm. But maybe working against that is the fact that we're often just seen as like a service bureau, right? People hand us a bunch of stuff and they say, make a course and get it out there. If we're going to change our role, there's some things that we need to think about and how we're going to change that role. And is it even possible to change our role and or even the way that we're perceived by others in our role?
The optimist in me says, yes, we can. And I think it's very easy to generalize, right? And say, yes, we can do it all across the board. I think there is an option in some organizations to do that. I'm not sure if it's in most organizations or not. I think there's a case for us to become business partners rather than L&D business partners, if that makes any sense. Just understanding the business way better, spending more time in conversations with stakeholders, talking about not what we do, but what they do. Slowly, even with very small experiments and changes, getting closer to the business. So for sure, in theory, it can be done. I'm seeing in our community, I'm seeing people who in time got there. But of course, it's not just our responsibility to become more business oriented, it's also what the system allows us to do. And in some cases, the system is very hard to change. And there's this saying in coaching that you can't coach the uncoachable. I guess for us in L&D and in instructional design, is like you cannot offer consulting services to someone who just doesn't want your consulting services, right? So yeah, it depends case by case, but it's our responsibility to try and to experiment and to push those boundaries for the next generation at least.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, circling back, if AI can do so many things, is there a next generation? One of the things in the programming world, I've seen commenters observing that if all of the junior programming roles are taken up by people using AI, then how do we ever achieve senior developers in the future? And maybe, I don't know, maybe senior talent isn't needed in the future either. Who knows?
Maybe we're
hold.
not needed
But-
at all. I don't know. I don't have an answer for this. What I did observe in practice is that even to interact with AI as it is right now, with whatever LLM you're using, you do need some sort of basic knowledge about, or you need to know what you don't know. You need to have a basic understanding of in your field of work to actually have like deep thoughtful conversations with AI. It's a bit like social media, unfortunately, because you go and the algorithm personalizes whatever content you get. It's very similar with AI because the questions you're gonna ask, it's gonna answer those questions. So there's a case to be made about critical thinking and making sure that you prompt the LLM in a certain way. But going further, whether we're still needed, I think that's such a big conversation to be had by everyone, not just L&Ds.
Yeah. But we're not unique in feeling this impact and this change. It is changing all kinds of other spaces and industries as well.
It's very interesting. I was talking to my friends who are in engineering, and what many people don't realize is that for them, for example, it's the first time when something like this happens, because over the past few decades, the need for engineers has only grown, right? And that's the problem with this, is that you have so many young people who have gone to these universities based on demand of work that's now slowing down or even dropping. So to your point, you have all of these junior people who are graduates who cannot maybe find work right now. So it is changing for literally everyone, artists, everyone. If it's any consolation that we're not alone in this struggle, I don't know.
Anyway, it's a tough concept if you are actually worrying about your job prospects.
Right.
Let's swing away from AI then and talk about other things that you're hearing in your community. other things that are on people's minds?
Yes, it's interesting because it is related to everything we've been
Hmm.
talking so far. And I was mentioning earlier this idea that if content is no longer our focus in these sessions, that when we bring people together, what is our focus, right? And how do we design sessions that people actually want to join, given we're seeing like lower and lower engagement in training, in traditional training? How do we design spaces where people can connect? So lots of the conversations that we have in our community are about experience design, not to be
Hmm.
confused with learning experience design. They're not two separate things, but experience design is the broader field. It is about, again, behavior change. It is about facilitation. This is a skill. Talking about ways to, job security, I'm feeling a bit stressed about this. In L&D, at least, not necessarily in instructional design, but in L&D, we do have this skills, this facilitation skill that we've been using so much in skill development workshops. I don't think, at least short term, I think we will see an increase in need for facilitation. So we can, put our hands up when it comes to that type of project. So yeah, these are some of the conversations. Again, this idea of systemic thinking, L&D in general, getting closer maybe to OD as a function and as a job description. It's something else that we are exploring quite a lot.
And I think there's
Yeah.
probably folks who are hearing that OD. What is OD?
Oh, sorry. It's organizational design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fill the blank in on that for us a little bit. What is organizational
Yes.
design?
So basically, if so far we have been doing a very small part of organizational design, right? Making sure or trying to make sure that people have the skills that they need to perform in their roles. OD takes a broader view, right? It looks at what are the processes that need to be in place for people to perform? What's the technology that needs to be in place? How are we designing incentives, formal and informal incentives? How do different people processes from HR, the people function, come together in order to have a cohesive narrative for an employee from end to end? So OD took this broader role in order to make sure that the organization has the capabilities to perform and that it performs. And again, we've been doing a very, very small part, delivering training, creating content, and so on. And as that maybe becomes automated or less needed, a way of looking at our future is what else is needed for people to perform, which has been traditionally answered by organizational design.
And that would involve us moving outside of our silo,
It does.
and breaking down barriers, particularly the way that we're currently perceived.
Yeah, for sure. There's no clear-cut way to get there. If you ask me, it is right now. It feels, and there's this theory of the three horizons. The first horizon is like the status quo. The third horizon is like an ideal that you have for the future that right now is very uncertain, unclear for everybody. And then there's this middle horizon 2, that's very messy, and it can be noticed because many different people are experimenting in different ways with different things, and there's no clear pattern that you can follow in order to get from A to Z. And I think that can be stressing and confusing for many people. And of course, you have a few ways to respond to that stress. You can either go back to your shell and be afraid and be worried, keep doing whatever you've been doing, or you can just be an experimenter yourself and trying things out, small things. You don't need to make big changes. And I think the future will require us to be more like that, because what I am not worried necessarily, but what I wonder is whether we will ever go back to more stable times, or if it's this velocity of change is something that we just need to get used to and adapt to it.
Change is the only constant, I think, maybe is
Yeah,
one of
yes,
the
that's it.
one of the
Summary.
yeah. No, you did all the hard work. Trust me on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that are shifting. Again, not just unique to us in our instructional design world, but in the broader world as well, too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we have a lot of roles currently in the learning and development space: instructional designer, facilitators, other sorts of roles, and they're kind of all a Venn diagram. They've all got some overlaps with each other, but there are kind of slightly different things. Do you think that all of these roles will continue on in the future, or will some of these be gone? Will some of these be completely different, or?
I think all of them will be completely different.
Mm.
For what will be gone, there is this role of, or at least how I've heard of it, is like L&D admin. And what they do is take care of like scheduling or sending calendar invites, creating the training session in the LMS and so on. So all the admin part, I think that's one that might be gone in a couple of years, given how much automation we are putting into workflows, right? But when it comes to all the other ones, I would say that they will, at least short term, it's hard to predict long term or even to assume, but short term, I think and when I say short term, just to define it, I think like 10, 15 years, that's
Okay.
my short term.
Okay. That's probably helpful to know, because some people might be thinking 6 months from now this is going to happen.
That's why I made a point to define it. They will change. These roles will change quite considerably.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, just to define it, learning experience designer, learning and development consultant, talent development specialist, instructional design. These are the few that come to my mind, but of course also L&D manager and so on. These are the ones that I think will change.
If you were helping someone think about how to navigate all of this change, what kind of advice would you give them based on the things that you folks have been hearing in your community?
I have this framework in mind when it comes to learning as an individual. I think the first stage is exposure, right? So I would say make sure that you're in spaces where you are exposed to all of these conversations, where you hear about how people are experimenting, the results they had, their lessons learned. So for me, that's community. Or it can be if you don't want to join a community. Honestly, as shady as LinkedIn might be these days, for me, it was such a good platform to expose myself to things, curating the people that I follow and so on. So that's the first bit, right? The second bit in this framework is experimentation. Just try things out. Anne-Laure Le Kampf has recently published this book called Tiny Experiments, where she speaks about like very tiny experiments. In L&D, it can be every time I get a request from a stakeholder, I will ask a different set of questions than I've asked in the past, right? That's one thing. Or another thing could be every week I will test a new AI tool, right? Just to see how it works. So very small things that you can do, right? You experiment. Then the other thing is reflect. Just sit a lot with how your role was so far, what you're seeing, what you're hearing in your company and in the broader world, in these L&D communities. And finally, if you have any insights that you think are worth spreading with others, make sure that you share them with the broader community, because there's so much that we can learn from each other. And as long as you can, of course, company policies and so on, but as long as you can and you're willing to share those insights, that's so important. So these four things: exposure, experimentation, reflection, and sharing, will be the future when it comes to learning.
Yeah. And I suppose just by doing that in a way that you either are part of or help generate or get to participate in a community,
Yeah,
also gives you that bigger space to get feedback loops, et cetera, and maybe just reassurance that you're not alone
exactly.
in this process too.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, that's one of the things that I've been hearing so much from people lately. This feeling that I'm in my small little bubble, and maybe you think, and I remember being in the same small little bubble at some point and thinking that, oh, only our company has these struggles, only our team has these struggles, only our country has these struggles. But then when you plug yourself into the broader community, there are so many patterns that you can see across geographies, industries, and so on. And there is a certain level of comfort that at least maybe you are doing not the right thing necessarily, but everybody is doing the same as you. Everybody is experimenting the same as you are, although you have never spoken to each other before. So yeah, I think community can also give you that.
Yeah. A sense of not walking this path alone, at least.
Yeah.
That there might be
Exactly.
other ears open and other voices to hear and reflect on. I did a quick Google for the Tiny Experiments book, and I'll follow up and look at that. That sounds quite interesting there. Yeah. Oh, we've talked about a lot of things so far, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a prediction, let's say 5 years, what's
Mhm.
one crazy thing that will be different that you can picture in your mind that we haven't, I mean, we're all going to be in flying saucers as instructional designers, or what's are we going to be in flying cars? Is there anything that you've thought of, or you're hearing from people that is just way out there as a possibility?
I mean, way out there. That's such a subjective. Um,
I stumped you. Sorry, I didn't mean.
no worries, no
Yeah.
worries at all. You sometimes need just a bit of
Yeah.
time to process things. I think one that I'm hearing quite a lot about. Let me be even bolder. How about organizations as we know them today will no longer exist in 5 years? Sure, it's a bold prediction, okay? So yeah, they will no longer exist in 5 years. In like the structures that we've had, the hierarchies that we've had, the product of the work, the idea of having a role in an organization, all of these things will no longer exist.
That's a big, bold statement for sure.
I know.
And so let's tease that thread out. What will exist instead of that? Or what will things look like
How?
instead of that?
You're challenging me here. I think I think one of the things that has been growing quite a lot, even more so accelerated by the pandemic, maybe, is the gig economy and smaller entities, as in smaller teams, delivering on things that in the past an entire organization was delivering. So that's one thing that comes to mind, because if you think about it, AI can enable us to deliver way more with way fewer resources. So that's one thing that I have in mind. The other thing that have in mind, and this is not necessarily new, this idea of roles not existing in the way that we have known them. The replacement is focusing on skills and thinking about what are the skills that we need to deliver upon a certain goal, and looking in the organization or even beyond it for people that have exactly that particular set of skills, right? Of course, we need better technology to assess skills and all of that. But that's one thing that it's been known as like the talent marketplace, maybe in some circles. But yeah, this is one way to paint that reality.
I had the privilege 2 weeks ago, well, almost 3 weeks ago now, the Canadian e-learning conference, which isn't it's small scale, but then Canada as a whole, population wise, is small scaled compared to other places too. But the keynote speaker there was speaking on skills versus jobs. That was one of the keynotes. And then there was a panel afterwards that talked about, further elaborated on that and fielded some questions, etc. I got to sit on that panel, but I am not an expert by any means really in the skills area, but I was quite honored to be part of that discussion. It is a different way of thinking, you know, even when you're posting up a job to look for someone, you know, what are you really looking for?
I guess the challenge there is that for so long we have identified with a job. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think the mental model will be quite hard to change. Just to challenge myself on this 5-year prediction, I think it will be hard to change just because of that identity. When you ask me who I am, I'm an L&D manager, I'm an L&D specialist, an instructional designer, right? What do you replace that, or with what do you replace that for people? Yeah, it's a very
and you know what? That's not a new problem for us, I think, in our space, because I mean, I've always struggled with people say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I like, well, where do you want to start? Because have you got 5 minutes? Because I got to explain a whole bunch of things to you about what, you know, and a joke in my own family for the longest time was that my kids didn't know what I did, right? Well, it's something with computers, where there are definitely roles and careers, you know, a teacher. Everybody knows what a teacher, or has a picture anyway of a teacher, even though that changes over time. And that's not a static thing. A doctor, you know, a lawyer, you might not have any clue what a lawyer really does, but you know there's a thing called a lawyer, and you can place that in a context to a certain degree. And then, so someone says to you, "Oh, what do you do?" "Well, I'm an instructional designer." And they look at you and they go, "Oh, you make graphics?" "No." "Oh, you make widgets?" No. You know, anyway, our space has always, you know, the things that we do, in part because we get to do so many different things, right? Like there's not, we're not just a singular thing. There's so many pieces of what we do. I've never been able to summarize, to give someone a short answer. I mean, I'm not a short answer person to begin with. I tend to talk a lot, but just that short answer that people go, oh, I get it. They just kind of always look at you, go, oh, okay. Oh, that sounds interesting. Where interesting means, okay, I don't know, you know.
Think about all the things that we discussed in this 45 minutes, right? So there you go.
Well, maybe we can run it through ChatGPT and get a short answer that everybody will be able to understand, and then we can just have that printed on a little card, or maybe we write it on our hand and we can read it to people when we meet them in a cocktail
on their forehead.
Yeah, it'll already show up in their Meta glasses.
Right.
You know, here's Chris and Lavinia. They are instructional designers, and it'll give them the blurb, and we won't even have to talk about it. We can go on to talk about the more interesting things at the cocktail party. So
yeah.
Lavinia, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. So glad you were able to make it. We've popped into the chat a couple of links to the research that you posted up on LinkedIn, so folks are welcome to check that out. Really awesome to have you here. And for the folks in general, if you're looking to gather more information, I will point out that here at Domino, we also have a recent report, the State of Learning Content Management 2026, where learning value is won or lost. One of the threads we're hearing is that the more stuff that can be made for learning, the harder it is to keep track of it, the harder it is to keep it all updated. And that's going to be something to wrestle with moving into the future too. Just another change that we're all going through here. And as always, I do have to say, instructional designers in offices drinking coffee, #idiotic, is brought to you here by the team at Domino. We work really, really hard to help L&D teams develop, scale, and deliver learning that maximizes employee value. Check us out, domino.com. If you're listening to us in an audio version only, which we know lots of folks do download from their favorite podcast place, hey, we're not too hard to find. Just Domino e-learning. If you don't spell it like the game or the pizza place, you'll probably find us faster. Anyway, Lavinia, thank you so much for joining us. It's been awesome. We look forward to hearing more about what you folks hear in your community and checking in with you again in the future. So
Thank you so much for having me.
Right on. Folks, let's dance on out of here.